Hollywood has always been accused of pushing boundaries, but some movies didn't just rattle nerves, they sparked sidewalk protests. Across America, church groups stood outside theaters with picket signs, warning audiences that these films were dangerous, indecent, and corrupting. But here's the delicious twist. The more they protested, the more people lined up to see them. So which movies caused such outrage that they turned theaters into battlegrounds? Let's rewind the reels and uncover the scandals they tried and failed to silence. The Exorcist, 1973. Few films in history have created the kind of frenzy that The Exorcist unleashed in 1973. Directed by William Friedkin, it told the story of a young girl overtaken by forces far beyond her control. But what audiences weren't ready for was the sheer intensity. Spinning heads, guttural voices, and some of the most shocking images ever seen on the big screen. Outside theaters, church groups wasted no time making their fury known. Protesters claimed the film was indecent and harmful, warning parents that no one should be exposed to such disturbing material. In some cities, picket lines circled theaters night after night, urging managers to pull the movie from rotation. Yet while they shouted warnings, something else was happening inside. Audiences fainted, others rushed out mid-screening, and newspapers were filled with reports of people needing medical attention from the sheer shock. What was meant as a warning turned into a marketing juggernaut. The outrage made the film even hotter, driving crowds to see what all the fuss was about. And while the protests eventually quieted, The Exorcist didn't fade. It went on to become one of the highest-grossing horror films of all time and is still hailed as a landmark of the genre. In the end, the protests didn't kill the movie's power, they cemented it. The louder the outrage grew, the deeper the film carved itself into American culture. Dawn of the Dead, 1978. George A. Romero was no stranger to shaking things up, but with Dawn of the Dead, he took it to another level. Released in 1978, the film dropped audiences into a shopping mall, crawling with the living dead. But beneath the gory fun, Romero was making a sharp statement about consumer culture, how people could become mindless long before they ever became zombies. That message, paired with the shocking visuals, sent church groups into overdrive. Protesters accused the film of being indecent and degrading, calling its violent images a threat to society. Outside theaters, pickets warned that it celebrated chaos and mocked human dignity. For them, this wasn't just another scary movie, it was a dangerous sign of the times. Of course, Romero knew exactly what he was doing. His movie wasn't just about the monsters on screen, it was about holding a mirror to real life. But the controversy only fueled its appeal. College crowds and late-night audiences embraced it, often treating the protests as part of the experience. Watching Dawn of the Dead felt like defying authority, a small act of rebellion with a movie ticket as the weapon. Looking back, the protests seem almost quaint compared to the cultural weight the film now carries. It's recognized as one of the greatest horror films ever made, both smart and terrifying. But in 1978, church leaders saw it as a threat to order. And their protests, they only made Romero's zombies march even louder into history. Pink Flamingos, 1972. If Romero stirred the pot, John Waters lit it on fire. Pink Flamingos wasn't just a film, it was a dare. A gleeful middle finger to the idea of good taste. Released in 1972, this underground sensation featured outrageous scenes designed to shock, disturb, and spark conversation. Waters himself admitted that provoking outrage was the point. Church groups responded exactly as expected, with absolute horror. Protests formed quickly, declaring the movie an attack on decency and an insult to audiences everywhere. Signs outside theaters warned people to stay away, and some groups even pressured local officials to stop screenings altogether. The message was clear. This film was too immoral to be allowed in public. But here's where it gets interesting. The protests became part of the film's identity. Every angry review and every picket line only drove more curious moviegoers to see what was inside. College towns, underground cinemas, and art houses became breeding grounds for its cult following. For many, sneaking into a showing of Pink Flamingos felt like joining a secret club, one built on defying the very people shouting outside. Today, it's remembered as a cult classic, outrageous in every sense of the word and still celebrated for its boldness. The protests didn't bury the movie, they immortalized it. John Waters didn't just stir up controversy, he turned outrage into free advertising. The Outlaw, 1943. Before the 60s, before the counterculture, there was Howard Hughes, a Hollywood mogul who knew how to turn outrage into gold. In 1943, his western The Outlaw premiered with Jane Russell as its star. On the surface, it was a story about Billy the Kid. In reality, Hughes made sure audiences couldn't take their eyes off Russell. That decision turned into a full-blown scandal. Church groups wasted no time condemning the movie, accusing Hughes of making a spectacle out of his leading lady rather than telling a story. Protests erupted outside theaters, with signs warning audiences not to support such indecent material. Some theaters even refused to book it altogether, fearing backlash from local communities. But Hughes wasn't one to back down. He leaned into the controversy, using the outrage to drum up publicity. The more the protests spread, the more audiences wanted to see the film. And once they did, Jane Russell became a star. Her career launched not despite the protests, but because of them. The irony is that while church groups tried to smother the film, they turned it into an overnight sensation. Hughes proved that controversy could be better than any poster or radio ad. The Outlaw rode into theaters with scandal as its saddlebag, and instead of crashing, it galloped straight into Hollywood history. The Moon is Blue, 1953. Sometimes a single word can cause an uproar, and in 1953 that word was virgin. Otto Preminger's romantic comedy The Moon is Blue was light, witty, and full of fast-paced banter. The story followed a young woman juggling the attentions of two men, all while refusing to play the submissive role Hollywood usually assigned to women. It wasn't scandalous in visuals, it was scandalous in the way it talked. Church groups and moral watchdogs pounced immediately. The very idea of a comedy discussing courtship and temptation in a casual, cheeky way was, in their eyes, a direct attack on American values. Picket signs appeared outside theaters warning that the film was corrupting audiences. The protests grew so loud that some cities attempted to block screenings entirely. Ironically, what the protesters found so dangerous, the open discussion of topics usually whispered behind closed doors, was exactly what made audiences curious. Moviegoers packed theaters to see what all the outrage was about, and Preminger, never shy about stirring the pot, used the controversy to his advantage. The more people shouted outside, the more tickets sold inside. Today, The Moon is Blue feels like a charming rom-com, innocent compared to what came later. But in 1953, it was treated like a cultural earthquake, all because it dared to let its characters talk with honesty. Some Like It Hot, 1959. Billy Wilder was a master of comedy, but with Some Like It Hot, he went further than anyone expected. The film paired Tony Curtis and Jack Lemmon as two musicians on the run who disguised themselves as women and join an all-female band. Add Marilyn Monroe to the mix as the irresistible sugarcane, and chaos was guaranteed. While audiences laughed themselves breathless, church groups weren't amused. To them, the cross-dressing antics, playful innuendos, and cheeky performances were more than comedy. They were a threat to traditional roles and standards. Protesters labeled the film indecent, organizing pickets outside theaters and urging audiences to stay away. The backlash, however, couldn't stop the momentum. Wilder's razor-sharp dialogue, Curtis and Lemmon's comedic brilliance, and Monroe's screen presence turned the movie into one of Hollywood's greatest comedies. Instead of sinking under outrage, it soared. Critics hailed it, audiences adored it, and it picked up an Academy Award. Looking back, the protests seem almost absurd. What was once treated like a moral crisis is now considered one of the funniest films ever made. Wilder didn't just get away with bending the rules, he turned the outrage into a timeless classic that still has audiences laughing decades later. The French Line, 1954. Jane Russell had already made headlines with The Outlaw, but The French Line pushed her notoriety even higher, literally in 3D. This musical comedy placed Russell on a cruise ship chasing love while surrounded by colorful dance numbers and catchy tunes. But audiences weren't just showing up for the songs. They were there for Russell herself. And Hughes once again made sure all eyes were on her. Church groups pounced instantly, condemning the film as indecent and immoral. The fact that it was shot in 3D only intensified the uproar, as critics claimed it invited audiences to ogle in a way no film had done before. Pickets lined theater entrances demanding that managers pull the movie from screens. Some theaters, under pressure, banned it outright. But as always, outrage worked like free advertising. People who might never have bought a ticket were suddenly intrigued by the scandal. Audiences poured in, Russell's career stayed white-hot, and the movie made money despite the protests. Today, The French Line is remembered more for the controversy than for its story, but that's the point. Hughes and Russell understood that nothing sells quite like scandal, and church protests once again did nothing but add fuel to the fire. Kiss Me, Stupid, 1964. When Billy Wilder released Kiss Me, Stupid, he knew exactly what he was doing, baiting the watchdogs. The comedy starred Dean Martin as a womanizing crooner, Ray Walston as a struggling songwriter, and Kim Novak as a stand-in, wife in a scheme that spirals out of control. On the surface, it was a farce. Underneath, it was a sharp poke at the conventions America held dear. Predictably, the backlash came quickly. Church groups condemned the movie as corrupt and indecent, calling it one of the most immoral comedies ever made. Protests sprouted outside theaters, and the uproar reached such a pitch that even some critics joined in, calling the movie a disgrace. But for every protester outside, there was a curious audience member inside. The controversy turned it into a must-see event, a movie that audiences felt they weren't supposed to watch. Wilder, ever the provocateur, had once again proven that outrage could be turned into box office gold. Decades later, Kiss Me, Stupid is recognized as a daring comedy that challenged the safe, squeaky clean tone Hollywood was known for. What church leaders saw as dangerous was, in reality, one of the boldest comedies of its era. Gilda, 1946. Long before The Exorcist or Pink Flamingos, there was Gilda. Released in 1946, this noir thriller starred Rita Hayworth in her most unforgettable role. With her smoldering looks and commanding presence, Hayworth lit up the screen and redefined the femme fatale archetype. But one scene in particular sent moral watchdogs into panic. Her famous glove strip number, a performance so suggestive that it had audiences gasping. Church groups wasted no time condemning the film. They declared it indecent, a direct attack on moral standards, and organized protests outside theaters. Some leaders even urged audiences to boycott Columbia Pictures entirely. For them, Hayworth wasn't just a movie star, she was a symbol of corruption. The protests, of course, had the opposite effect. Crowds packed theaters to see the performance everyone was talking about. Hayworth skyrocketed to stardom, cementing her place as one of Hollywood's most iconic leading ladies. Today, Gilda is considered a masterpiece of film noir, its tension and style still studied by critics and filmmakers alike. What was once seen as a scandal is now regarded as an essential piece of cinema history. The protests didn't stop Rita Hayworth, they turned her into a legend. The Pawnbroker, 1964. Sidney Lumet's The Pawnbroker wasn't a horror movie, a comedy, or a romance. It was something heavier, a drama about a Holocaust survivor played by Rod Steiger, struggling to live in Harlem while haunted by unbearable memories. It was powerful, heartbreaking, and daring. But that daring edge also sparked one of the most intense controversies of the 1960s. The problem? Lumet chose to show human suffering with brutal honesty. And that included imagery audiences in America weren't accustomed to seeing on screen. Church groups reacted instantly, calling it indecent and corrupt, picketing theaters, and demanding it be pulled. For them, it didn't matter that the film was a serious exploration of trauma, it crossed a line. What they missed, of course, was the point. The rawness wasn't there for cheap thrills, it was there to show the deep scars left by history. Critics who looked beyond the protests recognized it as groundbreaking, and Steiger's performance won universal praise. The film also forced Hollywood to rethink its outdated rules, paving the way for more honest storytelling. While the picket signs tried to bury it, the protests instead gave The Pawnbroker a reputation as a daring work that wouldn't play it safe. Today, it's hailed as a milestone of serious American cinema. Back then, it was treated like a scandal too bold for theaters. A Streetcar, named Desire, 1951. When Elia Kazan adapted Tennessee Williams' A Streetcar Named Desire, audiences braced themselves for a raw, emotionally charged drama. Marlon Brando roared onto the screen as Stanley Kowalski and Vivien Leigh brought Blanche Dubois to life with heartbreaking fragility. But while critics admired the artistry, church groups were less impressed. From its first screenings, protests exploded. They called the movie indecent, condemning its themes of obsession, strained marriage, and psychological unraveling. Picket lines formed outside theaters, demanding that it be censored or banned. The backlash grew so loud that censors actually forced Kazan to trim entire scenes before wide release. Even then, the protests continued, warning audiences not to see it. Of course, the opposite happened. The protests only heightened curiosity. People lined up to witness Brando's raw power and Lear's devastating performance. The movie earned critical acclaim, 4 Academy Awards, and a place as one of the greatest American films ever made. Looking back, it's astonishing how a movie now considered classic art could once be labeled too immoral to watch. But that's the story of Streetcar, a film that broke through barriers despite the picket lines outside. Peyton Place, 1957. If one movie perfectly embodied small-town scandal, it was Peyton Place. Released in 1957, this glossy melodrama peeled back the curtain on an American town that looked picture-perfect on the outside, but was filled with gossip, betrayal, and hidden struggles. Audiences were drawn to the drama. Church groups, they were furious. From the moment it hit theaters, protests began. Watchdogs claimed the movie glorified bad behavior and painted a disturbing picture of small-town America. Pickets formed across the country warning audiences not to buy tickets. Some groups even tried to pressure theaters into dropping it entirely, claiming it was corrupting the public. The protests, however, only boosted the film's mystique. Audiences ignored the warnings and poured in, turning Peyton Place into one of the biggest hits of its time. It was nominated for 9 Academy Awards, became a cultural talking point, and later spawned a popular TV series. Instead of being silenced, the movie became a franchise. Today, Peyton Place is remembered as a turning point, showing that American cinema could tackle real issues and complicated lives rather than sticking to sanitized fairy tales. But in 1957, it was treated like an open wound on the screen. The protests couldn't kill it, they only made it legendary. So there you have it, 13 American films that church groups tried to bury under picket signs and outrage, only to see them thrive. What they called indecent, audiences called unforgettable. And the louder the protests grew, the more tickets sold. It's proof that controversy doesn't always kill a movie. It can make it immortal. Which of these do you think was the most unfairly attacked? Drop your thoughts below, hit that subscribe button, and let's keep the conversation rolling.